So Northeast, so as you can look, there are total, if you look at the Northeast domain or region, there are total 64 districts in the Northeast India. If I include Sikkim, so it includes, there are 8 states. And how many of you can, if I hide this map, how many of you can locate all the 7 sisters? How many of you can locate all the 7 sisters? Not all. So the point I want to make here is that, okay, I want to see how many online students, how many of you, if I hide the map, I just make the outline of India's Northeast, how many of you can locate every state? Can you or can you not? Right? We need to locate them. Okay. Chalo. Good, good. So Shilpa, Shweta, others also, I'm sure. Okay. Chalo, good. So as we can see, this is the Northeast. If you see, this is Sikkim. We all know where Sikkim is. The entry to Northeast starts with Assam, and on the northern side we have Arunachal Pradesh. Then just adjacent to Assam, on the southern side we have Meghalaya, so Assam, Meghalaya. Then as we move on the eastward side, you will have Nagaland, you have Manipur and Mizoram, and Tripura on the lower, on the southern western side. If you see, 99% of the Northeast, 99% of the boundary of Northeast, it is surrounded by some foreign country. Okay, so we have so it is an international boundary. 99% of the boundary is international boundary, and that is where Northeast becomes very important. Secondly, if you look at the Northeast, it accounts for around 8% of India's land, but only 4% of India's population. So the number of people in the Northeast part is that number is very few. Thirdly, if you look at the Northeast areas, these are mainly difficult terrain, hilly areas, population is sparse, okay, population come here. So when you look at from these perspective, one thing that you find is that this area has been typically, you can say, it is neglected from the main land of the India. And the neglect is also because of multiple factors. One factor is, of course, the population is limited. The resource, India also was not a very rich country. We are still into a developing phase. So because of those factors, when we try to go in the historical background, we find that development has not happened. Even if I compare with the mainland India, the development of Northeast is relatively on the lower side. I'm not saying that every part of India is relatively doing better than Northeast, but still. So because every state will look at it from their own perspective, and they will see that why we are not developed. So when we try to look at it, now why Northeast is important? Northeast is important because of multiple factors, and these are the details of Northeast, as you can see. This is as per the previous census. The data might have changed. So out of hardly, you can see the population is around 4%, but now earlier it was 3%, right? As per the last data census. Population density is also less. As you can see, if I see 2 states which are broadly infested with the Naxalism, with the insurgency, one is of course the Nagaland, and you can see the population of Nagaland is hardly, how much? 20 lakh, 2 million, little more than 2 million, or maybe today it might be 2.5 million. And that is just 0.16 of the 0.16% of India's population. Broadly, if you look at the other state, even Manipur, just 2.7 million people, which are around. So if you account the insurgency areas in terms of population, there are not more than, you can say, 0.4% of India's population, just 0.4% of India's population in terms of the population who are being affected. Now it includes both people who are insurgents as well as the normal population living there. Similarly, when we look at the land, it accounts for hardly little more than 1%. So if you see from the perspective of the entire India, maybe little more than hardly 1.5% of the area India's land is infested with insurgency in Northeast. So, but again, whether big or small, a state is a state, and if it is not doing well, there is a lack of rule of law, development is not happening. So we definitely have to look at it from the perspective of how this should be resolved. So when we look at the Northeast, now as we go further in the history, you can see earlier the entire Northeast was part of Assam. Okay, sab kuch Assam ka part tha, and as it was part of Assam, Then the first state that was created, now because they are part of Assam, the states kind of felt that their cultural, their religion, their distinctiveness, all these areas, they felt that there is an imposition of Assamese language on them, and that is why they wanted them to carve out of the from the Assam. Though autonomy was given to these people, but however, state became a solution in long run. So Nagaland was the first state that was created in 1963 out of Assam. Then similarly, in 1972, Meghalaya, Manipur, and Tripura was created. Mizoram was created in 1987. Sikkim became part of India in 1975. Okay, and Arunachal Pradesh also became a state in 1987. Again, these data are not important unless until you are giving some one-day examination or some clerical examination broadly. So this kind of information will be helpful in those areas. But we need to know the little chronology, and as we'll study, a lot of these facts will eventually you'll be able to remember with time. Now further, so these are the states that were created on different dates. Then as we look at the insurgency, the armed insurgents, broadly, if you can see, there are effectively hundreds of armed insurgents movements which are right now there in the Assam. But broadly, there are 4 or 5 movements or insurgency groups which we can classify them as the major irritant in this area. So one major irritant is, of course, if I start with Nagaland, that is NSCN. NNC earlier was old one, the NSCN is the body. NSCN is National Socialist Council of Nagaland. Okay, so these are insurgency group. Then we have Manipur, you have UNLF. Then in Assam you have Ulfa and Bodos. Okay, so NDBF. So these 2 or 3 groups which are actually active. Except Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim, all states have one or more than operational insurgent group. Operational insurgent group, but mostly they are inactive. Okay, mostly they are inactive except Nagaland and Assam. Then, as we see, these are the most important geostrategic landscapes of India. 7 landlocked states. The problem with the Northeast is that when McMahon Line was created, which carved out the borders. Also, the Radcliffe Line. Okay, so when these boundaries were created, we were at the receiving end where the connection of India, the mainland India, of course this is also India, so connection of the mainland India with the Northeast was just with a small Siliguri corridor. Now this Siliguri corridor is just a very small narrow stretch of 22 to 30 kilometers stretch. That means if you want to connect to Northeast via land route, that is the only way. Now that is a very, if we compare with the land area, it is a very small stretch of land. And here, as we can see, you have China, we have Bhutan. Bhutan is a friendly state, but China is overlooking here. And China will always try to destabilize India. And we all know the reason. The China does not like India because China feels that India is the only country which might threaten China in future. Also, China has its own internal complexity, a lack of democracy, human right, all these factors are there. In India also we have such issues, but broadly they are resolved. So because of this chicken's neck, it is also called Siliguri corridor, is the connection between, you can see the red one, very small narrow stretch. So we have to be very careful here because any negative or nefarious advances by any of the states have to be countered. Then there is another problem is that the claim of China. Now China claims, if you see the Arunachal Pradesh, China claims that this land, Arunachal Pradesh, is